Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Richard Lewis Show. I am, of course, Richard Lewis. So superfluous. I don't even know why that's still the intro, but whatever. It's fine. And joining me today, a guest that you might not have expected. Maybe you're from the Valorant side of the aisle and don't watch a lot of my content, but I think this show might interest you because we've got one of the world's greatest coaches. It is Mike's from 100 Thieves. Thank you very much for joining me today. How's things?
I'm doing good. Thanks for the very generous title.
I think it's reasonable. I think, you're now a head coach at an elite level organization, and I know you've certainly, in my mind, done your apprenticeship. You know, you worked as an assistant coach as well. I guess we can start there and maybe work our way backwards. I mean, obviously, very big appointment at a high-profile organization at a time in esports where there's lots of scrutiny on, practices and I guess like efficiency in terms of like what type of staff you have. And so obviously I'm sure a lot of attention has come your way these past few months since you made it as the head coach. So I just want to talk about what that transition's been like for you and how you're finding it.
Yeah, so I think obviously when they first reached out to me, I didn't have too many offers last year when I was starting as assistant coach. One thing that MC and I were good friends, and we were both trying to get on the guard at the same time and work together, and that didn't happen for a few reasons. So then when they told me, like Dan messaged me and asked me about coaching for 100 Thieves with Sean, and I was kind of like, okay, that's kind of a big step up to be following behind like Sean Garras, who everyone like. I was from CS, but obviously I didn't know too much about him. But then we did a podcast together at the start of the game, stuff like that. And he's just a really smart guy, so there's a lot of pedigree there to kind of be in his shadow and learn from him. So I thought that was a good opportunity. And then obviously I knew when Sean left after Champs around like September, October, there was definitely going to be some concerns there, I think, for most people, because obviously he was kind of like the embodiment of the team, I think, for the public view, at least. But I feel like as a team, we all work together really well. The players know me pretty well at this point because we were living together for like 2 months in a house in Dallas, so you can't really get much closer than that. But I think the main thing going from that type of role change is just kind of how many more responsibilities you have. I think being in person here in LA is another big thing. How many questions people have for you, more of the responsibilities of talking to different people from different departments at the org to make sure everything goes well for the practice and the events and stuff like that. So
I mean, when Sean went out, I think it was like a big shock. That was like, what, September, was it last year?
Yeah, just following Champs.
Yeah, just after Champs, where obviously I know you guys didn't have a great finish. But it was still such a high-profile appointment. Lots of fanfare about it, lots of content created around it. I think it did genuinely shock a lot of people that, he was axed after like a 5-month, period. And so I wanted to ask you about, you're on the sidelines watching this kind of happen. So I kind of wanted to ask how it went down and does the public perception sort of alter or rather differ from the reality?
Yeah, I think some people, I don't think you could any way argue that it's a firing from like results or anything like that, because I think we overperformed expectations, like given initially what people had. I don't think there's any way you could legitimately sit there and come up with like a reason that he would get fired. So I knew the one thing like throughout the year that was always going to be hard for him was just like with his family, right? Because he likes spending a lot of time with his family. And the coaching life, I don't think, is very well suited to having a personal life. And I knew like, obviously it was harder last year because we were boot camping in Dallas and stuff like that. So you're spending even further away from your family for longer periods of time than if you'd be like working an event or casting or doing analyst work. So then even this year it'd be hard too, because LA, like doing a commute every day and stuff like that. So I think it's something that he liked doing and that he was glad he tried it, but over time it's kind of like you do miss your family. I think everyone has that in esports, even if you're like a player, like different parts of the team, stuff like that. So I think that was just a hard choice for him. Basically choosing like one or the other at times.
How did the players react to it at the time? Because you know, I know Sean quite well, and so obviously I'm probably massively biased, but you know, I know he can be a very, you know, like he's just one of those dudes who I think just naturally commands respect. You know what I mean? And I think he's generally very, like, a lot of people can, you warm up to him quick. You know, he's a very hard guy to dislike. So I was just wondering if it was like, you know, when he went, kind of if that maybe threw the players off a little bit, like were they a bit, you know, disappointed or sad or emotional?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone was pretty sad initially just because, again, I think it's different, like during COVID era when people leave a team or something like that, and it's like you never interacted with that person ever in person. They're just like another voice through the screen. But when it's the person that you go to boot camp with and you travel to events with and you spend a lot of personal time with, I think that it's really hard to not get attached, especially like you said, like Sean's a very like nice guy, very charismatic, very funny. So I feel like everyone kind of had that for a few weeks after everyone got the news. But
yeah. Yeah, and obviously, I mean, you know, you're jumping in to replace him. Would you say you have like contrasting coaching styles? I mean, do you have like a different philosophy? I know Sean could be very authoritarian when it comes to the type of plays and, you know, he wants to enact.
I would say there's probably like a difference in terms of like creating the playbook a little bit. I think something that I enjoyed learning from him too, because I always like to see it, even if I disagree or like I'm not fully on the same page. Like again, he is the head coach, so you have to buy into whatever system he has. Otherwise, there's going to be issues. So I really liked learning about how he views like the playbook and what he thinks is like the best style for Valorant and ways that he like creates ideas around that. Because I feel like he had a lot of like interesting things that he would do compared to other coaches that I've talked to. I think that helped us succeed a lot in terms of like the plays that we made, helping the players learn about different fundamentals of the game. So I think I always say I'm boring in contrast to a lot of coaches because I'm not as creative with stuff. I'm more of the fundamentals, kind of play the basic game, drill that stuff into your head, and then once we have that all down, we can get like creative after that. But yeah,
and obviously as well, I mean, you know, in that was DDK as a general manager. Now, a lot of people, I think, in esports, they have wildly different ideas about what a general manager does, what a general manager is. And, you know, I've worked at organizations myself in the past. I've sort of been in that general manager role. You know, sometimes I was closer to being a coach. Sometimes I was very hands-off. You know, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that kind of interplay you might have with him and what's the proximity that, you know, Dan has to the team, because obviously, again, I know Dan, you know, well. We've done tons of events with each other down the years, so I know, like, he's definitely thought about coaching at various points in his career, and he's got a great mind for that kind of analysis. So I wondered if you and him had a sort of, you know, very close relationship, or whether it was more, you know, you just get on with it, Mike, you do your thing.
Yeah, I would say we're pretty close since we've been friends for like 4 or 5 years at this point, back from CS. I think it's a good thing that you mentioned like GMs, because I feel like my experience so far is like each org has like wildly different expectations from what they want from a GM. Because I've heard stories from like other teams where a GM is more like a team manager, or they book scrims or stuff like that. And then there's other orgs where they pick out the whole roster and they're involved in that process and they're involved in logistics. So I feel like GM is a very like loose term. I kind of felt bad for him when he first started, because I think the last kind of like talent to GM transition was kind of like Henry G in everyone's like public mind. So it was kind of rough because everyone's like, oh, esports talent can't do this job. So he kind of had a little bit of a rough start there, I think, from some people, but it's just public opinion. So who really cares?
I can tell you firsthand that you know, nothing that never ended. You know what I mean? That's still going on. Yeah. You know, there is a general opinion, I think, among esports fans that if you're from a talent background, you've got absolutely, you know, zero chance of sort of being, you know, transitioning to being a successful coach, which is super crazy because Henry was like a successful in-game leader, you know, back in Counter-Strike Source. I guess because that game's been consigned to the annals of history, no one really cares. But yeah, I mean, you know, I think Dan has done the right thing. You know, what him and Henry did differently was Henry wanted to be like the lightning rod for the team, the focal point. He wanted to be a public figure, whereas I feel Dan has sort of just quietly been in the back, and you know, yeah, he tweets occasionally, he makes some rad content, you know, and so obviously when things are going well, he's going to get none of the praise, but when things are going bad, it's probably going to be you other players that take the heat, you know. That's the downside, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's just generally how it works. You pretty much know that from day one when you sign up for the job. I think I appreciate our relationship a lot because he kind of just lets me go in the direction that I think is the best to train the team and improve the team in terms of like metas and stuff like that and what we're trying to teach the players. He just makes sure that I'm like being honest with myself. So just having like lots of weekly conversations about progress, stuff like that. I don't have to like sit and explain, oh, why did you have like a bad scrim score this day, which I always find that mental, and that's what people think is a good way to spend like discussing how the team's doing. So
yeah, crazy, right? Yeah, I never understood that because it's like scrims are meant to be for experimentation purposes, and therefore you learn from losing. You learn from trying things and failing, right? Well, yeah, hopefully you learn. So one of the biggest lies in esports, and you know, Thorin's talked about this many times on his podcast. Every time you go to an event, you will hear a team say, "Oh my god, these guys were unbeatable in scrims," and it's like, doesn't really matter, you know. Like it's the worst barometer of success probably in all of esports.
Yeah, I think as a side tangent, like I think some things in scrims especially have carried over from CS in terms of people always talk about people being onliners or like they'll never do that in a match. I feel like it always comes down to how many risks people are willing to take in scrims, because we don't take many risks in scrims because we're just there to practice ideas and experiment and work on things. So it's like come match time, yeah, we'll take extra risks, but I don't see the point in building the whole identity of your team on taking those risks in practice, because what are you really like learning by running through a smoke or whatever day after day?
But yeah, I think you know, it's tough. Like I don't know if you agree with this sentiment, but I've always thought that essentially what the coach does is it's like an extra life for either the worst player or the IGL. Like when it comes to roster cuts, like they'll very rarely will people go straight to one of those when there's a coach you can pin the blame on. And I kind of feel like being a coach in esports right now is like some sort of mad world where it's like, you know, you're falling on, you know, you're jumping on the grenade to save somebody that probably shouldn't have their job and probably won't have their job anyway in like, you know, another 3 to 6 months. Do you agree with that?
I think coaching is still the reason I like coaching, at least in esports, is I feel like it's still very like fresh. Like I don't think anyone's gotten close to perfecting it or being like at the top of their game as much. Like the people I can think from CS would be like Zonic, like Xaz, maybe Valorant. I feel like there's a lot of coaches. I mean, I think Chet has probably achieved the most in terms of consistency this previous year. But I feel like coaching esports, it's finally getting to the point where more orgs are trusting handing off the team and the roster to GMs and coaches rather than the players. So I feel like people are actually getting their first kind of fair shot, where it's not just, well, we had a bad result, fire the coach. It's more like, okay, what did they have a reason why the strategy didn't work for this event? Do they feel like we should have made this roster move they were talking about a month ago? I think definitely at the start of the game for Valorant, and then obviously in CS it was always like that, right? Where it's like, coach is gone, keep the same cycle of rotation for players, get a new coach, problems still exist, okay, then you just do the rotating fifth thing where you just keep kind of fifth person, have a like run core of four. But I think coaching is still very, like, obviously it's not very consistent in terms of what you can expect, because at any point, like, it is a results-based game, so you can't expect to have your job security or be able to explain away every loss. But I do think overall it's getting to the point where it's less coaches first than players, but I think that's kind of an org by org basis. I feel like it's really hard to cut a coach and then expect someone to come in and rebuild an entire foundation under their philosophy in like a month before an event. I just don't know how you can do that, like, and not only once, but if you do that multiple times throughout the year, it's kind of like, what's a good example, like Watford and the, like, formerly in Premier League and stuff like that, just hiring a new manager like every month seemingly. It's like that has to be depressing for the players too, right? Because every month it's like, well, here's the revolving door, this guy's telling us an entirely different thing than the last guy. So I feel like that's pretty hard for players too, even if coaches like were getting the fires before.
Yeah, I definitely feel continuity is like a very underrated thing. You know, obviously, I also agree that there has to be accountability, and that accountability generally is, you know, it's the binary of, are you, you know, do you have the job or don't you? But yeah, I mean, you know, this is also a sort of interesting thing, because, you know, you're a coach at a North American team, and so that, to me, I definitely wanted to dig into it, and I know you might not be able to say too much, or because I've got this thing in all my content. It comes up all the time, the NA attitude. And remember, I've been, you know, covering esports not for a short amount of time. I've covered well over a dozen esports, you know, the global ones, and I've seen this recurring cycle, which is an esports begins. North Americans go into it because it's the next big thing, and that's where you can dump a bunch of marketing money into it. They build teams, they build orgs, they build brands. They become wildly popular because generally Americans are very, you know, bombastic and charismatic, big personalities. They come from a sports culture where trash talk is acceptable. And so, you know, people love them, right? Like they want to watch them, you know. They're not as like stoic and, you know, introverted, let's say, as some other, you know, countries or cultures. And so they blow up in popularity, and they're generally successful at the beginning, but then those other nations, they catch up to them, eventually overtake them with good fundamentals, and then that early success seems to be a poison in the system of North America, where it swirls around, and then, you know, people try and come in and help them and go, if you just listen and you do it this way, and we'll watch all the demos of the European teams and we'll play like them, and we'll nail it. We've got better talent. We've got a higher ceiling. But for some reason, they can just never get back to that. Then teams break apart. Individuals become streamers or personalities in their own right, and then the esports starts to wane, and then the next one comes along, and the cycle begins anew. So I wanted to ask you about that, because my perception is there's probably no harder like group of players you could coach than North American players with egos. I think it's like no other job in esports. What's it been like for you?
So I'd say my experiences have been pretty good, honestly, because I felt like the guys on Envy were all very dedicated to like winning, and I felt like, I mean, hardly any of them streamed like at all. I think streaming is like the biggest thing now as a competitor, because if they can go home and make X amount from like ad revenue and subs and whatever, they're like, well, what's the point in like I do that in this time frame versus practices this time frame like 5 days a week. I feel like that's the hardest thing for orgs and like coaches and management to combat against. Because for coaches, it's like, well, I don't have that, you know, like my job is based on winning. I don't go home and stream like 6 hours and make X amount of money. So, and then on this team, I haven't really had any problems either, because we kind of went the younger, less experienced side, where, you know, we don't really have any former CS legends on our team or anything like that that have transitioned over. So it's more people, again, that are eager to learn, want to compete. That's what they've been trying to do all these years. When they're like working side jobs or in school, they were competing for no money. And I think those are my kind of players as well. That's like my kind of people. I don't care if people think they're like, when we first started, I know everyone was kind of just shitting on our roster, because it was like at the start of the year, 100 Thieves was trying to get Breeze, I think, from EG, and then that fell through, and then we come through and people hadn't even heard of like some of our guys' names because they've been playing through tier 2 and stuff like that. But those are my kind of guys. I would feel like if I can get people that are hardworking and they want to listen and they want to be there, there's not really anything else I can ask for. And I don't really have the patience to tolerate people with like massive egos or try to like soothe those egos or appease them. I feel like I'd rather work with someone that actually wants to like be there and put their full effort in. So I think I've been pretty lucky in that regard that I haven't had to deal with that. I think in terms of the egos, I find it funny in esports how players, or people in general, not even just players, will get paid X amount of money, and then you ask them to take something somewhat seriously or do something in a certain manner that's professional. It's like, oh, that's cringe. And it's like, well, you're getting paid like X amount of money to be here, which is pretty ludicrous for like, you know, maybe hours input or like how much effort it actually is compared, because I've worked a lot of like labor jobs before, and it's like I was making pennies compared to that. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is kind of if you can get people past that and they actually want to take it seriously. Because I think that's the thing with Europeans a lot of the times, is like those teams, they sit there and grind it out. There's not a lot of like streaming or egos or like, I don't want to do this or I don't want to do that. Obviously it still exists to some degree. I just don't think it's as high. It'll be interesting. I think this year will be more interesting than anything, because I don't think NA will see like a massive downslide compared to CS yet. Unless it like keeps happening where people transition over from CS or people get lazy or whatever. But Europe is now like stacking their teams, so they have like Fnatic, Navi, Liquid. I'll throw Vitality in there too. Is like a lot of the talent stacked up to those four. So it'll be interesting to see if Europe, because before the past 2 years they've kind of had everything spread out for talent acquisition. So interested to see this year how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about Brazil getting on towards the end of the podcast, because I had Pansy on the other day, and I want to see what your thoughts are like in comparison to hers. But just to stay on this, you know, North American kind of coaching thing, you know, like, yeah, I talk to a lot of tier 2 Valorant coaches and tier 2 Valorant players, or not just the ones that come from Counter-Strike. You know, I'm keeping a very keen eye on Valorant, because I think CSGO is fucking garbage now. I mean, I like 100%, you know, I will say this publicly without any remorse. This game, the CSGO is so bad now as a game, and so bad in terms of the competitive depth and the overall ceiling. It's the worst it's been since 2013. It may as well be a different game to me. I don't even enjoy it anymore. I kind of acutely felt it during the major, and we've had 2 events like this year. Katowice is on at the time of recording this, and it's just shit. I like being the number 1 team. It just doesn't mean anything right now. You look at that top 20, and it's like everyone can beat everyone else. They've all like, no one's going to make big recruitment, you know, moves anymore, because there's no, like, the money's drying up. We're about to hit a recession. And meanwhile, I look over at Valorant, and I know everyone's complaining about the format in Brazil, but every single game there matters. The stakes couldn't be higher. Everybody's like really, as you were just saying, like gone all in to bring like all of the best talent possible, like create these like super teams, loads of like international lineups in Europe and American squads now that seem to really be working hard and gelling, and you know, nations we don't even have in CS:GO, you know, like being potential favorites, you know, like teams like DRX and stuff. So it's like I'm looking at Valorant thinking I just don't see a world where that isn't the future. Like I mean, so I've got to ask about the changing of the guard that's happened in North America. Because initially what put me off about Valorant was it did feel like the CSGO retirement home. I think one of the things 100 Thieves have done since you came in, as started working with Sean and Dan, was that you seem to have an acute understanding that there is talent in North America if you can just unhook yourself from the fucking clout, the cloutium dispenser. You could, and every like tier 2 player I was like talking to was like, for example, like when Sentinels brought in Shroud and everyone was like jerking off about it and pretending it was like a really good move. Right. They were all saying the same thing. Like there's players in tier 2 that would like turn his lights out like one-on-one, you know, like. So I wanted to ask about that, the getting away from the North American cloutium addiction and what it would mean for the scene.
Yeah, so I think probably the first person that should get credit the most for that was like MC with what he did with the guard, because that was like an even more unknown team. Because he's put like Matt's funny because he'll watch like players from ranked and be like, oh, I think this guy could be really good. I'm like, I don't know how you can judge that from watching this guy play ranked against like whatever Rick and Morty random guy. But yeah, I felt like he did a really good job with that lineup. I think that kind of opened people's eyes on like, we don't have to get someone that played CS for 5 years. That time is gone where they're not ahead anymore. Because now I feel like we'll play scrims, and sometimes you can't always get like against like tier 1 teams, or you want to play against tier 2 teams. I feel like tier 2 is kind of, it's getting used a lot more now because of franchising, but I feel like there's so many teams that are in tier 2 that could be tier 1 teams. Like I think Guard, M80, Shopify all look really good right now from that part of the pond. So it's like, I don't think it's always a fair description, but there's like new players all the time that I've never heard of, and you'll play a scrim against them, and it's not like they're just dropping like 30. They're also doing it intelligently. So it's like, well, this is crazy that people aren't just trying to be like pug stars anymore, because that's what I'm used to, is everyone trying to impress people by dropping a lot of kills and not really knowing any of like the mechanics of the game, or they don't have any lineups or have never thrown one in their life. So I think that's a lot more interesting to me, is like, okay, you have all these like 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, whatever, that are interested in learning the game, how to play it correctly. And also I think everyone like in this younger generation is just way fucking better at aiming than anyone like I was, especially. They're all just cracked on G Fuel or whatever, just 24/7. So I feel like when you add those like elements, and then you don't have to pay a buyout for any of them because they're all on like free agent teams and stuff like that, I don't really get the appeal besides like the clout, like you're saying. I don't really see the point. And it's not to say like that just because you get like a former CS player, they're not going to be hardworking or talented or anything. That's definitely still true. There's guys I think if they switched over now from CS, they would probably do pretty well in the game. I just think there's such a learning curve, so all these young guys that started in beta and have just been grinding it out, they're finally getting to the point now where that experience, all the kind of like old heads from CS, just doesn't really matter anymore. I've definitely felt it. I mean, look, I've seen it before, and I did say that, like, you know, you're going to get too, like, everyone who went, I was telling them, like, you know, with exceptions, because I think there were, like, guys young enough to, like, and with the right attitude, like, Ye, fantastic example, you know, like, when he went over to Valorant, like, there was no doubt in my mind he was going to be good. Like, I didn't know he was going to be, like, fucking insane. Best player
in
the world, yeah.
Didn't know that was going to happen. I won't lie about that. But I knew players like him were going to be okay. But I also knew, like, all of those dudes that went over that were, like, knocking on the door of 30 years old. I'm like, listen, I got no beef with you going over there to make some money. Like, go do your thing. But understand, this is, like, 1 to 2 years. And then you are going to have little Zoomers just banging your head off, and you're going to hate life because it's coming, you know. And you're right, we're starting to reap the dividends of that. And it's just, for me, what Valorant really needs more than anything is like strong mentors in managerial and coaching roles to keep those kids like on the tracks. Like if you do that, NA will like be a strong region. If you let these kids like blow up and like get seduced by the streaming world, you know, it's like it's gonna suck for a very long time for North American fans.
Yeah, I think that's when. I feel like there's still a lot of like older guys, especially like 30s. Like I think of FNS and Angel, especially from CS, that are still like doing it with the best of them. I feel like those are the type of people that you need around too to kind of like bring up the younger generation. I think FNS is a little bit different because like Crashies and Vic are a little bit older and they're from CS too, but I feel like he could also pick up younger players. Like, I mean, I guess Artis and Sam are pretty young too, so but yeah, I definitely think making sure mentorship is in the right place, because that was something I also felt was lacking in CS. It always seemed like everyone just fell into the same bad habits all the time, and everyone just did the same things the same way because anything else was cringe, or why would you want to take things seriously? So I feel like the approach so far in Valorant, there's a lot more competition between teams and taking things seriously and actually wanting to be the best instead of just being there to collect a paycheck for however long.
So, you know, the next kind of thing I wanted to just ask you about is the construction of the 100 Thieves roster, because I think it's kind of like there's a little bit, you know, of what we were just talking about that's gone on. Obviously, you know, Hiko was in the team, I think, when Sean and Dan came in, and he went and retired, you know, after a great career. And I think, obviously, Ethan went out as well. And recently, you've been talking about bringing in cryo cells. Actually, I think I sent him a DM when he got the job, because I know he was super fucking happy, and he seems a good kid, you know. So I wanted to just talk about this, like the building of this 100 Thieves roster, and you know, how you feel about it in terms of where it is in this moment in time ahead of Brazil, particularly with cryocells, the latest edition.
Yeah, so I think as the roster as a whole, one thing that I always like to have is make sure it matters a lot more, I think, in Valorant, like role flexibility. I feel like the days are pretty much gone where people specialize in agent or like can only play one agent in the category. For me, it's kind of like every one of the people on our team should be able to play like every agent in their class. And then obviously for Austin, it's a bit different since he's the flex player. So it's just like, yeah, we're just going to throw you on whatever agent and you're going to learn it pretty quickly because he's a smart kid. But I feel extremely confident going into Brazil. I don't feel like we have any role overlap. I feel like we've adapted pretty well to the meta. And again, I feel like for me, kind of the people that didn't have everything to start with, like none of them came into the game and were blown away with like offers. Like Austin is probably the quickest growing one in terms of he went from nothing to Immortals to 100 Thieves. But all the other guys, I mean, even Cryo up until this year was just playing on kind of like tier 2 teams. He went from SOAR to XSET, had a lot of success there, and then because 100 Thieves couldn't get him at the start of the year, and then he went to our team now. So I feel like it's also, so this is something that Sean talked about in the past too, where it happened a lot in CS, I feel like, where teams were very isolated from each other. Like no one really wanted to hang out with each other at all. It was just kind of, yep, I show up to practice with these guys and I go hang out with my own like TeamSpeak group of friends and stuff like that. Whereas we go out and do stuff every weekend. We're fine to talk after practice. No one's like having a life-destructing relationship with anyone on the team. So I feel like that's a pretty big difference compared to other teams in the past, especially in like CS. But yeah, I feel like what would I say? I'd actually say this is probably the most confident I felt in a lineup going into an event yet so far in my career, which obviously I haven't coached that many lineups, but that's how I feel in general.
Yeah. Also, as well, I mean, just betting in like new players, the spotlight on 100 Thieves is fucking insane. I mean, it really is. You know, they're one of the biggest esports orgs in the world. They're often held up as a benchmark to, you know, this is what you need to do if you want to be an esports org. Got my own feelings about that. I won't bore you with. But you know, when you come in and you are suddenly 100 Thieves player, you have this huge reach on social media. You suddenly have hundreds of thousands of fans following you that wouldn't ordinarily done it. There's an expectation you're going to be participating in content and YouTube videos and all this other media work. So when you take like a young player and sort of bed them into that environment, you know, it's not. I imagine part of your job involves prepping them for that and not just what they do on the server. Is that accurate?
I mean, I think throughout the team, like we kind of talk about certain stuff. I think again, I'm pretty lucky where most people are unfazed by that type of stuff. Like I think Bang is the player for us that probably like took off the most, like in terms of his performances, and he goes to champs and drops like 30 something on DRX. So I feel like he blew up a lot, but again, he's just, for being 18 when we interviewed him originally for the lineup, because he was on loan from TSM, so we had to figure out if we wanted to keep him or not, and we had like 3 days to decide that. And we talked to him, I'm like, this kid is so confident and professional for 18. Like everyone wishes they could be in that space when they're 18, because being honest, most people are like still fucking a lot of stuff up at 18, especially in esports. So I feel like in terms of like, you know, media management, it's just mostly don't do anything stupid, you know, which is easy to say most of the time and harder to do. But I feel like I'm pretty lucky because I don't really have to worry about any of our guys like tweeting stupid shit or causing unnecessary drama. It's just like,
well, you hope not.
Yeah.
Never say never, brother.
We just like to keep to ourselves for the most part, and then just focus on playing the game, and everything else is just kind of side aspects.
Okay. Just want to get a bit more general now, because we talked a lot about 100 Thieves, and then we'll come back to 100 Thieves and some specific stuff about Brazil down the line. But you did a big tweet thread that when I was researching this interview, you were talking about the you know, some of the changes people might have wanted for the future of coaching in Valorant. So before we discuss some of those, because this is like, you know, this is from a year ago, so obviously some of these changes, you know, may or may not have been implemented. But where do you feel coaching in Valorant is at, particularly compared to other esports titles?
So it's interesting now because obviously being in person at the office, I talked to like the COD coach more, and then like the league program in general, which I feel like the league, those are like the two esports I know the most of, like CS and Valorant obviously. I feel like the league has always been pretty ahead in terms of coaching staff and how detrimental that is to teams, because obviously like some teams have like 4 or 5 coaches for league, whereas CS is always kind of, yep, this one guy has to do everything, which isn't really feasible. And Valorant started off like that too. We're just getting to the point now where it's acceptable to have an assistant coach and then maybe an analyst on top of that. So I think it's getting to a better spot overall. I feel like there's always in CS and Valorant just a huge workload on one coach, at least to start, just because orgs, I always find it interesting how in new esports, when they come up or just as time goes on, orgs justify, oh, it's better to spend less money on 2 coaches than having like X star player. I think it's just, as time goes on, you realize, okay, probably having more coaches to divvy up the workload and work on more things and improve players as time goes on, then you don't have to spend as much money on star players or try to build super teams all the time. But I would say, I think the philosophy thing is the thing that we have yet to see still, because there's so many different aspects like practice schedule leading to burnout, like how much are you looking into that? Because I know there's some teams that practice like 6 days a week, 6 scrims a day. But when you spread that out over a year's time, how do your players feel about that? And if it's the same schedule every day, do they get bored of that? So I think there's all these little things that are pretty nuanced that I think people still just kind of do it just because that's the way they've always done it. But I'm always trying to experiment with, like, especially practice schedule, stuff like that. Okay, do you guys find this too tiring? Like, do you guys feel like you get more out of this than you normally would? That's just, like, one area. I think strategy is something that there's, like, in this game, there's way too many different routes that you can be successful to kind of narrow it down to one thing. And then on top of that, another department would be, like, analytics. But I feel like that's still very raw in esports. I don't feel like as many people have invested that as traditional sports have, where that's kind of like, I mean, for baseball, that's just how teams are ran, is by analytics for the most part. So I think there's a few different, like, nuanced areas in esports, at least for coaching and Valorant, that are still developing. But I do think there's a lot of things that people are doing, like, better than other esports, like in the past at least.
Yeah, I think on that point, a big part of it comes from people just not the people we recruit to be coaches, in esports. Like, for example, I've done sports coaching, and at a very low level, I'm amateur only. But even with that, you are going to be assessed. You're gonna have to demonstrate knowledge. I feel like in esports, even now, there's just like, that dude was an ex-player, so get that guy. Players like that dude, get that guy. And when it comes to, like, let's make meaningful practice sessions and let's draw up plans that keep people engaged, help develop skill sets, prevent burnout. No one knows how the fuck to do that. And I've seen it so many times, particularly in North America. And it's a problem in North America specifically, I would say. Because, spoiler, they just grind in Korea and no one complains. And yet they don't get burnout. I don't know why. I don't know what it is about this. Or rather, when they get burnout, it doesn't significantly impact on their performance. It just impacts on their mental health, which is like the crazy thing. Like, I mean, those StarCraft players grind. They just play ladder all day. You know what I mean? And it's like, somehow it doesn't impact on them in the same way that the grind does in North American teams. And so, and I can't explain why. Somebody with a science degree probably could. But anyway, I think the problem in North America is a lot of talent just gets put in the wood chipper, just playing games over and over and over again, to the point where, in a game with changing metas like Valorant, to the point where they just break. They just can't do it anymore, It's like, and they're burnt out by 24 years old and retiring to stream for a couple of years. It's really sad. Yeah,
I think one of the biggest things, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, is kind of like the purpose of things. I feel like there's a lot of teams in the past that, again, it is very much like the grind thing. And I think you have to weigh up what type of individuals you have, because there are some players that just can do that, right? Like, they can play the game, like, I feel like Ye's like that, where he just plays all the time and never really affects him. Like, that's just a grinder. And there's some people that aren't like that. So you just have to figure out what types of people you have on your team and what do you need to actually make them succeed. And that's kind of like the purpose aspect, because I don't really get the point of going into a scrim if you aren't going to practice anything. Like, if you're there's one thing, like, if you're playing to play like a match like a week before the tournament or something like that, but if it's just kind of day in, day out, not really like having anything to work on, I think it's very easy for players to burn out because you have no purpose. You're just pretty, like, absent-minded. You're not really invested mentally in what you're doing at the point. And I think that's something that, again, since coaching is still very new in esports in terms of how seriously it's being taken and actually being responsible and having the, I guess, responsibility from the org to actually carry that out. I feel like those things are still being experimented with. But I feel like now that we're actually getting to that point, you're going to start seeing, okay, teams are going to be probably a lot more consistent, less volatile, hopefully, would be the aim of it, from my point of view at least.
Yep.
I don't think it really makes sense to have, like, okay, you have a shot winning this event, and now a week later you're, like, the worst team in your region. I feel like if you practice like that and you try to build teams like that, you're due for, like, a massive migraine all the time. But
yeah. So let's pick out some of these points that you and changes you talked about. There's one I agreed with right out the gate, which is you said you didn't want to have coaches for online events, because obviously we can't then assess or monitor what exactly is going on. And obviously I'm coming from CSGO where, let's just say we've had our problems with this. Mm-hmm. So, that's a change that seems to make sense to me. Like I say, these are year-old opinions, so I don't know if your opinion has kind of like moved a little bit on it.
I think when I made that thread, it was about, it might have been the T1 thing that was going on where their coach typed in chat or something like that.
Yes. Yeah,
so I felt like at the time, and obviously people talk like from different teams and stuff like that, and it's online, so like, yeah, people could literally just be saying it in Discord with other people. I just felt like it's a very black and white situation to most people when it's more gray. Like, it shouldn't just be one way or the other, where it's like, okay, either we allow everyone just to fucking cheat all the time in online play, or we just have no coaches at all. I feel like there's a lot of things, and obviously it's hard to do when you're doing, like, round of 256 open qualifier. You can't have an admin in every room, but surely we can do, like, demo recordings. Just make it harder, because I feel like this was a point that I think Sideshow made at the time as well, where it's like, the more obstacles you put in the way of someone cheating, you can't just plead innocence after. Like, if you break all these barriers to entry for cheating, and then afterwards you're like, oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to, like, follow all these rules, it's like, well, then you're just stupid at that point, or you're being ignorant. But I think that's one thing that I find, and obviously, like, it's not going to matter as much anymore because online play for franchising isn't as existent. But I felt like that's something they could do for heavy moderating, which I felt like towards the end of last year when we were doing, like, LCQ and stuff like that, they did a lot better job where both coaches had to have, like, their webcams on, and they had to be sharing their screen, and then they had an admin Discord monitoring all that. I feel like if you're doing an 8-team, like, last chance qualifier event or something to go to champs, I feel like that's, like, the minimum, right?
Yeah.
Like, barrier to entry for cheating. But yeah, I think that's always going to be an issue with online play, right? Like, you can't monitor everything, but I do feel like Riot can put enough resources into it to prevent it. And obviously that's, like, a fucking issue from CS as well. Like, bugs aside from the game, it's still pretty easy to cheat.
Yeah, it is. And honestly, it's like I'm so over online play now. Like, I just, coming from CS, it's like Counter-Strike really fucked it up for everyone, which is, like, just, it's such a CSGO thing to do, because, like, we are, like, the rock and roll esport, I guess, in a way, people, because Valve don't really care, so people can say what they want, they do what they want, there's drama, there's edginess in our content, it's been around for fucking 20 years, you've got a slightly older, like, fan base, as well as Zoomers, and it's like, we had this online era where everybody pivoted pretty well. We had a pretty good tournament circuit, even though essentially everyone was landlocked. We still had some significant tournaments, some sizable tournaments, and everyone was just fucking. All the coaches were just abusing a bug. There were smoke bugs as well at the time. I'm sure some teams abused that. There'd be no reason not to. It's undetectable. Why not? I do feel as well like the number of smoke kills I saw during that era was astronomically high, so it's like for me, it sucks that you would even think about penalizing people, because we should lean towards trusting people not to cheat and abuse things and take advantage of, what you can do in the shadows. But what CS demonstrates is if you give people that leeway in esports, they'll just abuse it.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely heard stories in Valorant of, like, especially in the early days. I mean, there was like dramas about whether coaches should be allowed to watch like the live stream, right? Because it's 3 minutes delayed and there was no in-game observer slot, and players didn't want to stream on Discord because it lagged their game. And it's like, I don't know why, like, this, like, just because it's a new game, it resets everyone's brains on what's ethical versus not. I just feel like there's certain barriers. It's a twofold issue because, one, there's a lot of idiots that are just going out of their way to cheat because they can, and everyone else is doing it, so why shouldn't I? And it's like, well, you can have some integrity, right, for the type of position you hold, but that usually goes out the window. And then I feel like from the event organizers' end, there could be more barriers put up against online cheating, but it's not, nothing is going to solve the issue either way. And if people did eventually decide, like, kind of like the CS route, right, for some stuff, they were just like outright not allowing coaches to talk for certain events around that time.
That's the knock-on effect, right? Like, they fucked it up so bad that now it's like, it makes me laugh. Like, I mean, listen, if you're one of the coaches that didn't abuse the bug and you're dealing with the fallout from that, I get being angry and saying the rules are stupid, but what the fuck do you want Valve to do? Like, put it this way, you know, there's footage, there's like famous footage from an event. I think it's when Virtus Pro were playing. It might be like 2015, might be a Gfinity. I don't know. My brain's mush now. But there's literally fans in the crowd just holding up fucking signs: "Go A, go B."
Oh yeah.
Right, you know, and it's like, how the fuck doesn't anyone notice that and do something about it? Is beyond me.
Yeah.
But then, like, think about realistically, like, coaches could do all sorts of shit. Like, I mean, that's the real talk. Yeah, like, I don't think they're telepathic. You know, like, I'm not crazy, but at the end of the day, who fucking knows? Like, you know, when the coaching book came out, like, you know, dozens of coaches came out and said, yeah, that's been in the game for ages. Like, you ever think to tell anyone about that shit? Like,
just 4
no,
years passed by.
Yeah, like 4 fucking years. An abusable online bug in the game that you could even figure out how to deliberately get it. You know, it wasn't just something that randomly happened. You could induce it by doing certain things, and nobody thinks to bring this up. And then people complain about online play. So yeah, I mean, like, now that the coaches are sat there and they can't even make eye contact with players, like, fuck them. That's my opinion. You know, fuck them. You were your profession was collectively trusted with a great responsibility, which Valve never wanted coaches in our game. By the way, Valve don't like coaches. Valve think it's a 5v5 and it should all be done on the server. And once again, you know, I hate to say it, they were right. So yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, like for me, I like what they're doing over in Valorant, where it's like you've got the coach in like a little booth, and they can like
separated.
They're separated, but they can like beam in. I like to see us do that, but it ain't gonna happen now because of what the cheating coaches did.
Yeah, and to me, it's such a different world from like traditional sports because I'm so used to like football, basketball, whatever, where coach is just like constantly interacting with the players like throughout the entire game, and then in esports now it's just getting to the point where pretty much the only time you interact with the players is like the practice day. And CS, it just feels like such a 180 because we went from the era of we're just gonna have our coach IGL because they can talk all the time in freeze time way back when in like 2016 I think or so, and now it's just coaches just sit there and can't do anything, can't tap their shoulder, can't say fuck yeah or whatever because that might be a code. So yeah, it's quite the witchcraft hunt now.
Yeah. The other thing you talked about was letting coaches be the in-game leader. So in theory, you could basically have them making calls all the time, constant, you know, not limited conversation, and you have your 5 players, all cracked aim stars, and you make them go and do their thing. And so we've had this discussion in CSGO as well. And it was back when G2 Esports and /Kingwin had an international lineup, and their plan was to basically like, let's make an all-star lineup with no recognized IGL and just have a coach behind them call in all the strats And loads of people in CSGO initially liked that idea. They're like, yeah, this is like, having the head coach talking to the quarterback. It makes sense. They do it in sports. It'll elevate us to the next level of Counter-Strike because teams will have a higher overall skill ceiling. There won't just be one little withered dude with a big brain, but he can't move his arms properly, and he's telling everyone what to do. So we were totally into that shit. And then obviously, now it can never happen because of everything that went down. But, you said a couple of things. You said, first of all, you didn't think that focusing on fragging over creating, meaningful systems was actually not improving the skill set, it was reducing it. And you also said that you didn't think there would be enough coaches that could actually do that role anyway because the coaching role and the IGL role are so fundamentally different. So I'm guessing you still feel the same way about that one.
Yeah, I just remember watching that CS era, and I felt like, and again, like, the game was in a different spot, but I feel like when you take IGLs out of the equation, and like I'm pretty sure the coaches for the most part can only talk during freeze time, or at least that was one period.
Yes.
Where you could ramble off everything to do that round. I just feel like it's so robotic, and there's no like mid round involved, right? Like most of the time there are players that can mid round outside of IGLs, obviously, but I feel like it's so much cooler when you watch like a perfect read happen, or someone makes like a really good adjustment mid round, rather than like, everyone is like robotically doing like steps 1 through 3, and they're all like insane aimers, but they can't like think as much outside of that. I feel like that's just really boring to me as a coach. I'm sure for like viewers it may not matter as much, but yeah. And then I also think the other requirement, like it's getting better in Valorant in terms of like quality of coaches out there. But I think less and less now, I feel like less and less coaches are former players now, or at least players of a high caliber, at least from my experience so far. I feel like it's more either people like me that never played at all, like Chet as well. And then I feel like there's some people like MC that are kind of like tier 2, tier 3, came up, played a little bit, and then swapped over. So I feel like that's another aspect, because IGLing is easier said than done. It's not just as simple as like do this, do that, day's done, we won type of deal. So
yeah. Well, with that, that actually segues pretty nicely, because I wanted to get your thoughts about in-game leadership, and you also had said on Twitter, that it's very hard to judge the worth of an IGL like externally, because there are some IGLs that they're the only people that make calls. Like some IGLs, like they call the strat. If it falls apart, they call the mid round, change up, and it's all them. And then there's other IGLs that like they might devise a playbook, but they might want somebody to be more vocal and assist them in mid-round calls or when people are actually playing, and you see that sometimes. And so, and also as well, I mean, some IGLs just get carried to fuck. I mean, let's also, not rule that out. Like, irrespective of what they bring to the table playbook-wise, they're playing with like some cracked players, and it doesn't really matter. It's like it's less important. So, what is it? What do you think is what defines a great IGL, and what do you look for in an in-game leader? From a coaching perspective.
So I feel like most of the time when you talk about IGLs, most people immediately go to just strat calling or mid-rounding or how intelligent they are about the game. But I feel like the part of IGL that isn't talked enough about is like leadership, just purely that. Because it's like, again, coaches can't talk the entire game. So someone inside the server is going to have to like keep up spirits, uplift everyone. And I feel like that's such an undervalued part of the role that people don't talk about enough. Because like if you don't have anyone on the team that can do that, I mean, you're gonna have a shit time when things are down and you use like your 2 timeouts already, things aren't going well, and it's just like, well, everyone's emo, I guess we lost then. So I feel like that's a quality that I look into a lot, someone that's actually gonna bring people up. I think that's a hard thing both with IGLing and coaching, is coming in every day and not being like the negative person trying to keep everything not exactly positive, but you can't like take away from things, right? Like you have to keep things moving forward, moving towards progress, moving towards better results. And then on top of that, I guess for judging more of like the in-game stuff, I just like talking about the game, because I feel like if you can throw enough different scenarios at people and try to get an understanding of how they think, that's a lot better than just sitting there and talking shop about whatever. I don't think there's like any which way there's no like 10 question test you can give someone, and if they score like 10 points, they're the best IGL ever. Everyone thinks differently about the game, so you just have to figure out, okay, does this person think similar to me, and what would that look like as time goes on. But yeah, I've met so many different IGLs in this game that think differently, but I don't think that makes any of them like significantly better or worse than the others, just different styles.
Yeah. Like I say, I mean, I agree. It all comes back to the same thing, because I think a lot of people just in esports in general, you know, they're not very socially developed commensurate to their age.
Yeah.
And so obviously what builds character is, and by extension the ability to lead, is, you know, being put in like, you know, tough situations, you know, what it's like to have a boss you can't do anything about, you know, yelling at you. You know, a lot of esports competitors never had those shitty jobs, right?
Yeah.
You know, they've never been on a building site at 7 o'clock in the morning while it's still fucking dark outside, and your foreman's telling you if you don't get fucking 4 pallets of bricks up that ladder, you're gonna get fucking fired without pay. You know, like,
Yeah.
People don't know that world, and so when the handful that do, like, I always feel they're the ones that have the perspective, like, holy shit, I'm playing video games, let's fucking make the most of this, you know. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And age, I mean, it can just be a maturity thing as well, you know. Like, guys, what the fuck are we being emo for? Like, we're only like 6 rounds down, it's fine, you know. Little things like that. People can get very emotional. Just one aspect to that I want to ask you about. I couldn't neatly fit it anywhere into the interview, but social media seems to be a big deal in Valorant to a degree that it isn't in CSGO and maybe a few other esports, in the sense that I think players are always acutely aware that if they have a bad performance, they are going to go on Twitter and they are going to get flamed. There's going to be, if their DMs are open, there's going to be messages there telling, you know, saying awful things. And I've noticed there seems to be this routine that if you lose a game, you rush to Twitter and you tweet, super sorry, I'm so sad, I played so bad, I can't believe it, I let everybody down. And it's like this preemptive, like, give me sympathy. And I don't like it, because what it says to me, and I might be wrong, that's why I'm asking you, but what it says to me is like the player wasn't living in the moment. Like it must have crept in at some point during the game. Like, fuck, people are watching me play bad. People are looking at my score. And if that ever creeps in your head when you're on the server, I think you're fucked. I think you're going to crumble. So I wanted to ask if you've ever sort of encountered that, or if you think that is a very real phenomenon, or you think that's just like my external perception because I don't, you know, work with these guys.
I think that definitely exists. I haven't really had any issues with that on my teams, but I feel like in this day and age, a lot more people are much more in their heads about what other people think than before. And my kind of thing that I always tell the players is like, especially after a loss, right? Like, I have greater things to worry about than what someone on Twitter or Reddit has to say about our game plan or how we played that map. 'Cause I reserve what I hear from opinions for people that I respect. So it's like, I don't really care for the opinion of someone that I don't respect or don't know or whatever. I think it's very easy for players, especially if they're like streamers and stuff like that, because that's their fans or their community or whatever, to be like, oh, well, people are just like not going to like me as much or whatever. I think people get very much in their heads about one bad performance, even if it's not entirely on them. Like, there's, I definitely think, well, I can't say as much for CS, but in Valorant, there's just some rules where it's like, you're going to have a shit game. Like, if you're playing Icebox as Sage and you have to plant the bomb every round and you're getting mollied and ulted and all this stuff, you're not going to drop 30 most of the time. So it's just like, that stuff's just out of your control. I think that's what players probably don't realize as much. They're so much in the moment of I'm having a bad performance that they're not thinking about, is that like really my fault? And obviously, like, sometimes it is going to be your fault, and it's going to be, okay, after the game, let's take a look at that and figure out why so it doesn't happen again. But yeah, I think a lot of people just get in their heads about public perception and all that stuff, which, yeah, that might matter down the road if people think certain stuff about you and you're trying to be like the content creator of the century or something like that. But if you're focused on winning at the moment, then that's just like a mental obstacle that your coaches or your team needs to help you through. Because obviously I do see it happen where it's like if people have a bad map in different teams, it's very hard for them to get back into the game. I feel like any of our guys, like, I think it's happened or not consistently, but it's happened before where someone has like a rough start to a map or series, and then the next map they're way back into it. But
yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's just a me thing, but it's like, you know, I just, you know, my brain is wired, so like I don't give a fuck about, you know, like I don't suffer from like, you know, player one syndrome, you know, like, you know, I'm not the main dude in the story. It's never really give two shits about that. And when I used to play football, you know, like, because I wasn't very quick, I couldn't play at centre back. So they used to put me defensive midfield, and basically every game, I wasn't very good. Like, real talk, but good enough to play, but not good enough to play in any other role than the one they utilized me for. And it was like, this guy's their star player. You follow him, you kick him. That's your game. I'm like, yeah, okay, I can do that. You know, and same when I used to play, you know, rugby, played a lot of that. You know, I was just a guy who just used to get in the mix in the forwards. You know, so. At the end of the day, it's like, I don't want to be the hero. I don't want to score the try. I don't want to score the winning goal. I don't give a fuck. Like, I'll just do whatever donkey work I have to do so my team can win. Because at the end of the day, I'm still sipping the champagne with you. I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck if I get a hat trick. You know what I mean? Like, that bottle is still coming to me. You feel me? So, yeah, I wish more players had that attitude in esports, and I definitely see some players that, like, really do wither under the heat of, you know, you got bad stats this game, you've had bad stats in a row, and I think even like great players like Neo in Counter-Strike talked about, you know, players playing for the scoreboard. It's a very real thing, and it's definitely limiting on teams.
Yeah, I think with our team, again, I've been pretty lucky where we always talk about it's not any one person. Like, it's not just like the staff, it's not any certain player. We feel like everyone on our team is kind of like a star player in their own right. So I think it's easier to go into games with that mindset where it's like, at any point, I feel like any of my teammates can pop off, and no one needs to be like, I feel like it's really bad when teams have like the sole carry, like this guy needs to pop off or we're fucked. I feel like that's such a bad mental state to be in constantly.
Yeah, imagine being that guy, right?
Yeah, there's just too much pressure involved with that. So I feel like having like an evenly built team is much better for that. And then at the end of the day, like, who gives a shit about like VLR rating or stats at the end of the day? Like, I'd rather have a trophy in the cabinet than have 1 point whatever rating on VLR, like, at the end of the day. I think if you have those priorities mixed, then you need to reassess that. But
so look, there's no real neat way to fit this in, but I'm conscious of time, you know, because I know you've got work to do. Like, so we're sort of into the last like 20 minutes ish. So look, you were at Envy. It sort of ended strange, much like Envy itself, in my opinion. Merging with Optic, you know, like, who the fuck saw that coming like a few years ago? But I wanted to talk about it because, you know, there was obviously like drama coming out of the org just in general, and then there was like some sort of financial dispute. You know, we talked about that privately, and so I wanted to get your thoughts now that you've had a bit of distance and time between it about, like, you know, was Envy like a dysfunctional train wreck at that time? You know, what were you aware that like it was sort of starting to crumble a little bit as a brand, and or was it just like you were so engrossed in the work you were doing with the team, you weren't really aware of that? And just generally sort of how you felt, because it's never nice to have to go public and say, yo, can I get my money?
Yeah. So I feel like Envy was just kind of a weird org for me because I feel like it happens in esports a lot where you can be the coach of a team or on a team, but you never really interact with the org. So my connections were pretty much just through like emails to anyone outside of like our GM who was at practices. Mm-hmm. So it just felt really dysfunctional. Trying to get like obviously like salary from a contract or whatever, and you're going through emails and then not getting responses or, oh, we'll get this done by then type of stuff. Where with 100 Thieves, it's way different because it's like you talk to like so many people all the time from different departments. It actually feels like a real business. I guess that was the thing about Envy. It didn't really feel like functional in that sense. It seemed like the roles were kind of weird and what people were responsible for, and you didn't really know, like, if you have this problem, you go talk to this person type of deal.
Right.
And I knew, like, my other thing with Envy was I knew that since I was a new coach and that was my, like, first real team, really, like, first gig, I knew I was bound to make mistakes and fuck stuff up as well in terms of, you know, you're not going to get everything right away. So I feel like there's stuff that I, in terms of like approach for strategy and stuff like that, that I've changed from then that I kind of regretted doing at the time, which I knew like basically at the start of that year, I think for our Iceland qualifier, they had Chet trialing. And then obviously afterwards I left, they were talking about like bringing him back in, which I think is fine because obviously like he went on to do great things. They're all friends. I just felt like the communication from the org on that aspect was pretty shitty from my end because it's like I can handle someone telling me like if they don't think I'm doing a good job, because that's actually better for me because then I can go and try to fix the things that you're concerned about. But I just don't like being led on in that aspect. So that was something that was kind of annoying to deal with at the time because I think it's pretty hard when you, like, obviously I was pretty engrossed in the work and we had some pretty immediate success. So that kind of subsided a bit. But it was kind of not depressing, but solemn, waking up every day and then doing X amount of work and then not knowing when you're actually going to get like paid from it. Yeah, I think it's the main thing. And then obviously, like, when you bring it into the public sphere, people always try to like twist it or narratives get messed up very quickly. Like, I had to make a tweet a few months later about, because people kept harassing Chet about it. I'm like, he's not really like the one that fucked up. Like, the org is the one that caused all the issues. And then he came in afterwards and had to deal with it. So I felt pretty bad for him. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, look, my thoughts about Envy are pretty well recorded at this point. Like, I don't know, man. Like, one of my biggest disappointments in esports was Hastro. Like, for fucking real. Like, you know, we've even talked about just how like disappointing it is to see him end up being the dude that he is right now. Because, you know, I don't give a fuck. Like, I'm just telling you straight, like, whatever. You don't like it, cool. But I mean, like, you know, it was like Envy was, it should still, first of all, it should still be around in a meaningful way. And it should have been a beacon to show all future players you can build your own brand via success. There can be something for you after esports, and players can create orgs that are player focused and achieve excellence. And that should be the Envy story. That should be it. That should be a non-stop fucking circle jerk about them. But instead, you know, Mike's ego, like, not you, Hastro's ego, just completely, like, I don't know, man. Like, it's so wild. Like, I don't know if it's like he never shook it from being a competitor, where you need ego, you need insane ego. But like just the handling of like end stage Envy, he was just always on Twitter just saying like patently ridiculous things. And I even seem to recall, like, because I think this is what set me off, I wrote an article about him just being an asshole. Like, that was the whole article. I just wrote an article just saying, here's why Astro's an asshole. DeSoto didn't publish it. It had to go out on a sister website, you know. but I think it was after. I think it was after this with you, because I seem to remember like, wasn't he like initially dismissive with your shit, and then afterwards he put out a tweet saying like, "Oh, you know, I'd love to thank Mike's for all of his hard work," and it was sort of, here's why we did this. If there's ever like a fucking excuse for not paying somebody. So I don't know. I don't know what your interactions with him were like, but dude, like, it's sad. It's fucking sad, you know, for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, again, I never interacted with him that much because it was mostly just emails and stuff like that, with people trying to get the contract done. And then obviously afterwards, when I was just like, I've had enough of this, and I just made the tweet because there's no LinkedIn really for esports. Everything's by the way of Twitter DMs and Discord. So it's like, yep, I'm looking for team. This is kind of like what happened. I didn't want to go like super into detail because I knew it would just cause like a shit ton of drama. And then afterwards, obviously, it was the kind of like, oh, this didn't happen, but this happened, and then trying to like see if I'd walk it back or whatever, if things could be remedied. And it's like, well, there's like 3 months to remedy the situation. So I'm just kind of a person where I don't really have a lot of tolerance for bullshit as time goes on. So, but who knows what would have happened if I like did walk it back, or if I didn't air any grievances, because I'm pretty happy and fortunate for the spot I am in now. So I think my main takeaway from it is that I would just like I always think my mistakes is stuff that I can help other people learn from, hopefully, or not even if it's my mistake, just shit I've gone through. And I would like it at some point, like if certain things in esports, like other people don't have to deal with. Like, I hate the narrative in esports that you have to get basically fucked over a bunch before you get any like amount of success. I'd like to mitigate whatever ways I can to prevent that in the future, whether that's like hiring or just being honest with people and not leading them on about like, I feel like that happens a lot where people get led on about whether they're getting a job or not, or like contract stuff. And it's like, I would just like as much as possible prevent that in my path as I can for others, because it is a shitty thing to go through, especially for young people.
Yeah, I you know, listen, brother, I love your optimism. God, I remember when I was in my 20s. It was so cool. But I'm gonna tell you this year with all the money problems, I mean, for real, like you're gonna hear more about people like not getting paid. I mean, shit, man, we just had a organization go under in CS, and it came out that they'd got like, they bought a player from like G2 and paid his like buyout, which was like 6 figures, and then it turned out the player had paid that buyout on the proviso that the org would pay him back, and now the org was broke. Yeah. Like you're gonna hear stories like that all this year, because I mean, times are hard, you know.
Yeah, well, like NSG and Valorant with all the talent and money. Yeah,
crazy shit, right? So I don't know. I you fight the good fight, brother. I'm 20 years deep, so I just don't give a fuck anymore. I'm just so over it. Like, I just feel I've just been writing the same story, you know what I mean? I've just been writing the same story for like nearly 2 decades. Like, org promised X, Y ended up happening, where's the money? Oh, the org's disappeared. You know, it's just a procession of disasters, essentially. That's esports history. Yeah, exactly, you know. And so we're going back to the dark times because people are worried the bubble's going to pop now, and that's when people start packing up their lemonade stands and fucking off to whatever the next scam is, like fucking crypto or whatever the fuck. So anyway, enough of that. Again, I'm getting into my dark thoughts, and I don't want to poison your youthful, exuberant mind. So the good news is we're going to talk about some good stuff. We're going to talk about, obviously, the event that's coming up in Brazil. You're going to be there. This format is insane. I'm very excited about it, even though a lot of the community don't seem to be. And I've seen players complain, and I've seen fans complain, and I've seen team owners complain. And usually I love it when there's an anti-riot dog pile. Like, I'm straight on there. Ludicrous, drop bows on them. Let's go, you know. Yeah. But this one, is, I don't know, a bit divisive for me because I'm so bored of CS and the terrible formats we have in that game right now. Endless round robins. The idea of high stakes games on day one super appeals to me. So I just want to ask you straight out the gate about the format and, you know, how do you feel as a big team wanting to go deep?
I didn't think it was as bad as what people thought initially. I kind of agreed with Vandy's points on it overall, that it is, the whole point of it is just like to showcase all the teams at the start of the year. It's not like there is no real big rewards outside of prize pool, obviously, and then if you win the whole event, you get an extra slot for your region to qualify for Japan. So it's not like, it'd be one thing if you make top 3, you make Japan automatically. Then I think people would be even more pissed off about like, oh, I could get knocked out, whatever. But I think it's more interesting this way because now, okay, you get to see all the teams play in every region. I think people can be pretty dishonest about, oh yeah, I would watch this team like X amount of times if they had to play 3-0-3s before they eliminate. It's like, no, you're not. You're going to watch them like if they're playing against your favorite team, and that's it. So I think the format's fine, and also just not even from a spectator standpoint, from a logistics standpoint, how feasible would it be to have like 30 teams in Brazil for like a month and a half if you want like one of these formats that people suggested, unless you're doing overlapping streams, which again you get into the no one's going to watch some of these games. So I think it's a pretty good route to get as much viewership, and also it's a lot more fun. I think sometimes throw an event like this where there is stakes, like it is kind of cool. Like, yeah, you could just get knocked out and go home after like a day of being there. I think it's
just hit the fucking beach. It's Sao Paulo, for fuck's sake. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, just go out drinking. Like everyone I know who's been to Sao Paulo says it's wicked. Like, and that's why, you know, when we did the major in Rio, I'm like, nothing against Rio, but I always felt Sao Paulo might have been a better like venue for it. You're in a great arena, like great part of the city. So I don't know. I think it's gonna be rad. I think it'll be full a lot of the time as well, especially if like a team like Loud has a fucking deep run. You know.
Oh yeah.
I think it's gonna be rad. So I am actually psyched about watching it. The format would be perfect if it was double elimination. I don't know why we moved away from double elimination. I just feel like it was the ultimate esports format. It wasn't broken. I don't know why everyone started bringing in like fucking GSLs and, you know, round robins and
Swiss and all the stuff.
Yeah, Swiss system, blue ball system as I call it over in fucking CS:GO. You know, the blue ball system. Like, what the fuck are we doing? Like we had the ultimate format right there the whole time. You know, you've got 2 lives, make them count. And if you battle back through the lower bracket, you know, you're going to be at a slight disadvantage in the final. Have at it. There you go.
Sick
Boom.
story though. Like we have a lower bracket,
exactly.
Right?
Yep. And dude, Fnatic's 1.16 back in the day, they were just legendary for losing on day one and battling, you know, or just getting through groups and, you know, fucking having these insane lower bracket runs to win the tournament. They were known for it. So it's like, you know, Jesus Christ, like, well, why did we stop this? Like, but whatever. Anyway, that's old man boomer ranting again. So, who are the teams that we need to talk about here? I want you to pick 3 teams that you feel are the genuine front runners to win in Sao Paulo, and you can pick yourselves. Mm-hmm. It's fine. I'm not gonna call you out on that if you do it.
I would normally say ourselves, but I'll pick 3 other teams to keep it interesting. So I would say Na'Vi,
Okay.
NRG, and let's say Leviathan. I'll throw them in there.
Oh, okay. Holy shit! I think the only one Pansy picked, if I remember, it was like a week ago. I think we did the interview now, but she picked Na'Vi as like her third, I think. Gotcha. So but I don't think she had NRG or Leviathan. So talk me through the thought process here, because that means you're not vibing with DRX or, you know.
Yeah, so I think DRX is
all Fnatic.
Yeah, DRX is interesting. Just because they announced recently, like literally the other day, that they weren't playing with one of their players from the last roster. They're bringing this younger, like cracked kid, like Foxy9, I think is his name. So they said he's playing, and then Zest is going to be a 6. So they are making a change, which I feel like skews people's perception a bit more, because then you're obviously... I thought Zest was really good, so I think that changes things up a bit. And then NRG, I mean, I just have a lot of trust in Vic, Crashy's, FNS. I don't know too much about Som personally, and then Chet obviously on top of those three work really well together. And then Artist is someone that I've thought has always been like really talented, very intuitive to the game. Obviously quite the personality for the game as well, but we've obviously practiced them before they flew out, so I feel like they showed a lot of good things in practice, and we kind of talked about different things they did, stuff that we liked, because it's always a game of, you know, what can you see from other teams that you can use yourself. So I feel like that team should be able to achieve good results. And then Na'Vi, again, just another team that only made one change. I'll be interested to see how Cena does in this meta, what they do to play around that. But I feel like everyone else on that team is sick as fuck as well. Like, I think Xiao is one of the best players in EMEA. And then I have a lot of trust in their coach, Doom Bros, to do well with that team. So that's kind of like those two teams. Leviathan as well. I think they're a team that doesn't get really talked about enough, but I feel like everyone on their roster is pretty insane. And they had really good... I mean, they were our favorite team to scrim at Champs just because they actually took practice seriously and were actually trying to practice stuff. I felt like they got pretty unlucky in their run at Champs, but I feel like they could really do well this time around.
Yeah, I mean, because looking at the bracket, I mean, it's like I said, it's so... it's just brutal, dude. Like, I mean, like trying to predict who's going to have a deep run here is like... I think it's insane. You know, it's like it's so hard to do. Like the form just doesn't mean anything at all. There's like there's a few in the first round where there are like clear favorites, sure, but I mean there's some others, you know, where it's just like Jesus. Like I mean anything could happen, you know. So with that in mind, I mean, you know, I know you don't have to talk about it too much if it's a thing, but you know, I know when you come into tournaments like. Coaches and managers and you know the people above you, and they come to you and they go, right, well, you know, this would be considered a successful finish for us, you know, make sure you get this, and you go, yep, I'll do it, boss, and then you're like, fucking hell. I'm super worried. So what is a good tournament for 100 Thieves? Like what is the goal, what's the yardstick that you guys have set yourselves?
It's funny because we were talking about this in practice the other day, because as soon as this format got announced, people were talking about like, oh, there's no like reason to really like try as much or whatever. And it's like, well, that's a great thing to say to Riot after they let you in the franchising. Like, we still give a shit about your event.
Crazy.
My thing is like, even like we played in an off-season tournament, right? And it's like, if I play an event, I'm there to win the whole thing. I don't really care about saving strats for later in the year. It's like I always have confidence in us to recuperate after whatever happens at the event and be ready for the next step. So we're always just there to play, throw everything out that we have, try to win the whole thing. That's our measure for success. Because I feel like when you start getting in the mindset of, oh, this event doesn't really matter, so I'm not going to try. How do you ever know you're going to be in that mindset? If that's always like, oh, there's an excuse here, like, oh, I'll cop out of this one because this happened, or we didn't like the format. It's like, how are you ever going to know, like, what's your limit or what you need to work on if you're not fully investing yourself into it? I think it's just a very dangerous mindset to get into. So, yeah, we're always gunning for first.
Good stuff. Listen, anything, like I say, honestly, anything can happen in this bracket. Oh, yeah. It is so crazy. Like, I don't even know how you prep for this. I guess this can be the last question. Like, how the fuck do you prep for a format like this? Because it's like, you know, so if you win your game against Edward Gaming, you've got two teams to prepare for, but then also down in the other bracket, you know, assuming you win your second game, you've got 4 teams. Like, really, realistically, conceivably, there's maybe one that you definitely should prepare for, I guess. But like,
favorite,
but you might not be. So, Like, what do you do in this situation? Like, how do you maximize your time?
So I think going into the event with stuff like this, when you have a month and you know there's not going to be any VODs really, because it's all new teams for the most part, right? Like most of these rosters haven't played together. It's mostly just coming in with like what you feel like your best game is to be confident against any other person's game plan, not worry about too much about anti-strain. Obviously, like going into what you were talking about, like the later matches, I feel pretty fortunate with our assistant coach, James. And then we have our director of analytics, Tim, who helps us with like just acquiring like map data and stuff like that. So it makes vetoes a lot easier when we're looking at that and what we actually need to review for teams. So I feel pretty fortunate because I have those two guys helping me out for that. So we can have a pretty good turnaround time. I mean, James is a really smart guy. Obviously, like, I don't know if you know him too much from CS, but I feel like he's really intelligent, really hard worker. Makes life definitely a lot easier for me with that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he's like obviously one of those guys who was just around CS, you know, like just seemed to be one of those dudes that was like really well liked as well, you know, like just a super cool guy that like never heard anyone say anything bad about him, like well respected, you know, one of those. So, I mean, yeah, like honestly, I'm super looking forward to it. I'm actually looking forward to this tournament way and above any CSGO tournament this year, with maybe the exception of the Paris Major. Like, I'm so checked out. So I'm hoping it's going to deliver, and maybe the fans will come along and be like, you know, yeah, actually, when the stakes matter, everything's super intense, and
yeah,
you know, it's a good feeling. Sucks to lose, but it should suck to lose. You know?
Yeah. Unless all the favorites bomb out first, and then people complain about that.
Put it this way: if that does happen, Riot will change the format real quick. I think, like, you know what I mean? Like, oh shit, our viewership is fucked.
Yeah,
so
it's actually double.
That'd be funny.
I just didn't tell you guys.
Yeah. So look, the actual last question I always ask people when they come on the show, as I'm sure you know, is, you know, where can people like check you out like next if they wanted to? And obviously we know you're going to be out there in Sao Paulo, but are you 100 Thieves going to be competing anywhere before that? Any like cups, anything going on, or are you going to be throwing a stream on and breaking down some demos or some shit? Like, what you got going on?
No events beforehand. We'll probably be throwing out some like interview vlog type content if people want to check that out. I always like doing that stuff with the team, so you can kind of get impression of what the players are thinking before the event. We'll obviously do stuff at the event as well. Definitely not a coach streamer, so I guess you guys will just have to miss out on that. And then if you want to use godforsaken Twitter, sometimes I tweet stuff or talk about where we're going to be at, so that's about the only place you can keep up with me. Otherwise, I keep it pretty private most of the time.
I don't blame you, brother. It's the best way. Twitter was a mistake. Yeah. I wish I knew that 10 years ago. But anyway, look, man, thank you for being so gracious with your time. That just flew by for me. I thought it was a great conversation. So we'll definitely get you back at some point, maybe later in the year. You know, so thanks so much, and best of luck in Sao Paulo.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. Great talk.
Yeah, no worries. And there you go, guys. That is Mike. You might not know him. You should really go follow him on Twitter. He doesn't tweet much, but when he does, it's good. Not a drama dude, not a bullshitter. Just a good, solid coach out there trying to make his way through the NA with a happy-go-lucky attitude. Yeah. So support him. And thanks again for coming on. And that was the Richard Lewis Show. As always, I don't know who the next guest is going to be. I don't know when it's going to be, but it will be a banger. So make sure you do all that Zoomer shit. You subscribe and like, and maybe leave a comment for the algorithm. I don't even know what you do anymore. Maybe I have to divide this up into shorts so you watch it. But anyway, that was this episode. I'll see you next time, and until then, take care of yourself. Bye.